in Qigong class the other week, we got talking about the perception of time, as I'm sure you do in all your Qigong classes. So, the perception of time seems to be relative to the observer. Probably heard that before. I think Einstein said something like that, didn't he? Time is relative to the observer. We used to say in India that if the observer is relatively stoned, then that time seems to go on forever. But you don't have to be stoned or high on drugs to experience alterations in time. Let me explain. So, I had a friend, spent all his life living in the same town with the same people, doing the same job week after week, year after year. And he moans to me that his life's just flown by. It just seems only like yesterday he was at acid house parties enjoying life, and now he's 50 and it's all just gone by so quickly. Fortunately, I don't have that concept of time. That's a terrible affliction. See, I've moved around a lot and lived a lot of different places and wore a lot of different hats. So I've got many anchor points in my life that seem to fill in the time. Because if you've done the same thing all the time, over and over again, maybe you remember the births and deaths, or a couple of good New Years, or the time you crashed your car, or something like that, and the rest of it's kind of a haze. But if you've been all over the world doing all kinds of different things with lots of interesting people, where basically your life was different from month to month, then you've got lots to remember and lots of anchor points, and it seems to be quite full. But apart from that, there's something else very interesting that happens. So if I talk about my life experience, so for many years I was a maintenance electrician in a factory, clocking on, clocking off, sometimes doing horrible shifts, 6 to 2:10 at night. So the job ran your life. And so I went from feeling like a time slave and like something out of that movie Metropolis by Fritz Lang from the 1920s. If you've never seen it, you should watch it. Like the slaves drudging to work and drudging back home again by the clock. So I began to actually feel like a robot in a machine. The lifestyle kind of makes you like a robot. Robotized. Roboman. You're just a mechanical appendage of a large machine. So I went from that to being in India, where all of a sudden I had, by Indian standards, tons of money, right? 3.5 grand, which back in the early 90s, if you were Indian, that was a lot of money, I suppose, yeah? Peanuts for a foreigner, but a lot of money if you were in India. And with that 3.5 grand, you see, I was able to buy free time in India. So it works like this. Because I'd chucked my job in and I had no house to go back to, no job to go back to, I had nothing really to come back for or any appointments. I'm an electrician. I can just chuck a job and go and get another one. That's the advantages of being a tradesman, okay? Not bound to one company or one office. And in fact, staying in one place too long goes against you on your CV. So I could leave all that behind. I was fortunate that I was a tradesman, okay? And I just chucked everything, got on a plane, went to India. So here's what happens to you when you get there. For the first time in your life then, don't forget I'm just an ordinary working class person, okay? And we don't normally get to have freedom until we're in our 60s, by which time we're too old and tired, or we might have even died before we got there. So you could look at it as having your retirement the opposite way around. So you retire when you're young, so you're still young enough to get drunk, ride motorbikes, chase women around and enjoy yourself when you go travelling around the world, rather than with your Zimmer frame, you know. So that was another good philosophy as well. Basically, live fast, die young, be a good-looking corpse. That was me when I was in my 20s, like, you know, getting old was for boring people. So there was that kind of devil-may-care attitude as well, which had evolved basically from being stuck in a factory for 6 or 7 years. It's, my God, is there more to life than this? Is this just it for the next 40 years? To some people, it would probably be something that made them feel secure. Oh, I've got this job for 40 years. But to me, that was the opposite. It was a prison sentence. So, having that kind of personality then, where I'm a bit independent-minded and like doing my own thing and don't like being stuck in a rut, all of a sudden I'm in India and I can do whatever I want. Well, what is it that you want to do? Nobody had ever said that to me in my life, ever. Hey, you can do whatever you want. It was always, well, how much money have we got? What can we do? Oh, if I work hard and save up, I might be able to do that next year. And suddenly I'm in India and I can do whatever I want. The problem was, you see, because that had never happened to me before in my life, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I'd never been in a position in my life where I could do what I wanted. And for a while, I didn't know what to do. I was given this freedom and I didn't know what to do with it. So, I wasted lots of time drinking, chasing women, smoking pot, adventuring and all the rest of it. But over a period of time, I got into, as you grow up and mature, okay, your liver doesn't take the alcohol quite so well anymore, so you'd start entertaining yourself different ways, and I got into spirituality. This coincided with the discovery of possibly one of the most magical places on earth, which is a place called Gokana. Unfortunately, lots of other people realised it was magical as well, and to be honest, paradise has now been trashed, and I think they're building a parking lot there. But back in the day, in the 80s and 90s, this was the place to go if you were a bit of a head, as in you had a bit of a head on you. You were a proper hippie, not some person, as we used to say, stuck in Goa, drinking beer and going to parties. You were more in India, in more of the spiritual soul of India. It was a nice place to be. But anyway, what happened there over a period of time then? So if you could imagine when I used to go there, I just used to live in a hut on the beach. There was no electricity. Maybe they had a generator and the bar or the restaurant had some electric lights on, but you had no electricity in your room. There was no internet, no Wi-Fi, no mobile phones, no television. There wasn't even any cars within a couple of miles because you had to walk there. Which is one of the reasons why it remained paradise, is because you couldn't just get out of a taxi and be on the beach. I found the same thing in Greece as well. If there was a beach by a road, it was usually full of obnoxious people. And if you actually bothered to go off into the wilderness and walk for a few miles, you could find an empty beach. And there'd probably be some nice people around if they were there. It's funny how the masses always seem to want to congregate in one place. And the rest of us, we don't want to be in the crowd, we'll go looking for something else. I've never followed the crowd. I've always looked for something different. It's what brought me to Gokana. So over a period of time then, when I was there, there's nothing to do. So what are you going to do? Well, swim, walk in the forest, get into nature, sunbathe, talk. I used to go for breakfast, and breakfast would sometimes last an hour. If there were some interesting people in there, maybe breakfast might last 8 hours. It didn't matter. Nothing really mattered because there were no time constraints, you see. I used to go there for 6 months, just leave. I didn't have a life in England. I didn't have a house. I didn't own anything. I had nothing really to leave behind. So I just used to go there and plonk myself down in Gokana for 6 months and then wander off after that. So what happens then when you get out of the Western world and this mentality that we've always got to be doing something, everything's by the clock. If you watch tourists as well, like even when you go on holiday, like the holiday's by the clock. You say, when's this train coming? Oh, forget the bus, we can be there by this time. It's all about time. And one of the things that used to make me laugh as well was people who used to leave the West and then give themselves a month in India to be spiritual, to get enlightened. And you ain't got a cat in hell's chance, because you've still got one foot in the material world. I'll explain this. So I was fortunate then that I didn't give a monkey's really about owning anything or being successful in England, or really care what anybody thought of me. Okay, I was freed from all of that. So I just used to get on the plane, go to India, and I'd left everything behind. I'd jumped in with 2 feet. I didn't know when I was coming back, if I was coming back, or even if I'd still be alive in 6 months to come back, and I didn't care. The problem then that most Western spiritual seekers have got is that they're still embodied in the Western world of owning a house, owning a car, having a job to go back to, and having things to think about in the future, and plans to make, and things to get back to, and paperwork to do, and tax return. So you've never really left it all behind. You might think that you have, because you know when you guru's ashram for a month and you're pretending to be spiritual and pious and all this, and then you just go back to your normal life. But you never really left it. This is what happens. So I was very lucky in that I chopped it completely and left everything behind. Jumped in with both feet, swam far from the shore, or in other esoteric terms, I just jumped into the abyss. Nothing to lose, I didn't own anything. So when you look at what a lot of Western people have tried to achieve in spirituality, and you can see now why they've failed to ever really make any real progress or find anything new, it's because they never left time behind. And you can't in the Western world. So, since the Middle Ages then, what we've done in the Western world, and these aren't my ideas, this came from Ivan Illich, it's an intellectual. So, basically, we mechanized time sometime in the Middle Ages. Before that, we had peasants, okay, who lived by the sun, moon, stars, and there was early morning, there was midday, and there was before sunset, which is actually how we used to live in India. Oh, I'll see you on the next full moon in such and such a place. Or, oh, I'll catch you by sunset down near the beach. There was no, oh, I'll meet you 5 o'clock at so-and-so. None of that. So we'd left time behind. So during the Middle Ages, it suited the mercantile class to basically bring and control people's labour, control people's labour by the clock. So before peasants, you would basically were free to, let's say you were a carpenter and you were building ox carts, okay? You'd build them when you felt like it, basically. Oh yeah, I'll have them ready in a couple of weeks, whatever, like, you know. And you'd work at your own pace. Now, with the Industrial Revolution, suddenly people had to work at a different pace of time and keep in pace with the machine. And it was relentless. I've experienced this myself. I've worked in industry for years, maintaining production lines. I've seen what it does to people, and the stress and the pressure and the disharmony that living this way creates. But it has to be like that, or they wouldn't make money. There you go. We create our own mess for ourselves. So, the mechanisation of time then. So before that, people had a natural idea of what time was. And then all of a sudden, time is taken out of a natural context of sun, moon, earth, stars, high tide, low tide, midsummer, equinox. All these things meant a lot of things to people in the past, because they lived, the fishermen, the farmers, everybody had to know about the seasons and about time, and this is how they did it. So, and what happened to me then, when I was in Gokana, when I had nothing to do and all day to do it, and you start to notice certain things. You start to notice that the moon rises over here at the beginning of the season, but it's moved to rising from behind that mountain by the end of the season, and the sun has started at that part of the beach at sunset, and now the sun sets over here. You've also noticed a change in the behaviour of the bats and the dolphins, and the snakes do different things, different seasons of the year, and cobras build nests and things like that. You start to notice the bats, you start to notice all the insects and wildlife and the habits of the place. Because there's nothing else to do, you see. You're not occupying yourselves by being on the internet, by being on the phone. There's no newspapers. You knew nothing of what was going on in the Western world. For all I cared, the Western world could go to hell in a basket, and to be honest, it always is. While I was at Gorkana, I didn't give a damn what was going on in the Western world. It didn't matter. And we didn't want to know. When people used to come to the beach with the latest news from England, we'd just walk away, man. We weren't there anymore. We'd left that behind. So I'd become a more natural person then. So I didn't have anything to go back to, anything to tie me, and I'm practicing meditation and spirituality at my own pace and my own time with some wonderful teachers in Gorkana, and things began to really shift for me when I was there. And I started to experience states of eternity. I can't describe this to you. It's, if you talk to some of the yoga people, maybe they've got some jnanic states where there's a feeling of being eternal. It's indescribable. And there was times when I'd be walking on the beach, and it could maybe take an hour to walk, but that wasn't an hour. That wasn't even a year. It was an eternity. It's indescribable jnanic state. So I'm going to stop wasting my time trying to describe it. But this eternity in Gorkana seemed to shift as well, and it always seemed to come around at the time of Shivaratri, which is Shiva's birthday. Funny that. And around Shivaratri, within the town, which is one of the most holy places in India, they used to pull this chariot, which to me always looked a bit like a UFO. Okay, maybe I've watched too much Ancient Aliens. But they used to pull this chariot through the street and throw bananas at it, and you'd get a blessing from God. Well, we used to throw bananas at the Brahmin priests, like green ones, because they hurt more. There you go. Gotta be mischievous. So there was this wonderful festival, the banana throwing festival, or Shiva's birthday, where you got to throw bananas at the police and grumpy Brahmins. So, but also something else very special happened at this town. There would be the eternal January and the never-ending February. And I remember we'd be sat having tea, coffee, and is it February? No, it's just January. Well, it must be nearly the end of January. No, it's just like the 12th of January. Wow. I thought it was February or March or something. No, it's still January. Towards the end of January, it seemed like May. No, it's not even February yet. And then February would come. And February is normally a very short month, but it would be the eternal February. And then eventually you'd find out that it was March, but it felt like September, or even the whole thing with time just went out the window. So you got up in the morning, you came back when it got too hot. In the evening, afternoon, go to the forest if it's getting really, really warm. And so you moved around with climate, with temperature. What you did in the day depended on how hot it was or what time of the day it was. But you made your own thing. You do your yoga in the morning, go for a swim in the afternoon, sit and meditate, sit in the forest. Nothing to do and all day to do it in. So what we don't realise then in the West is that I've been talking to my students about conditioning quite a lot. And sure, a lot of conditioning is easy to guess, isn't it? That, you know, if your mum and dad were nice to you, you're probably going to grow up like a competent, confident, loving person. If your mum and dad were a bit mean to you, then you might have some issues in life to overcome. That's easy to figure out, isn't it? That's conditioning. Or if you've been raised in a Hindu society, you'll look at the world through the eyes of a Hindu. If you were born in a Christian society, you'll look at the world through your Christian conditioning. But you don't think that it goes any further than that, but then think about your perception of time and the mechanization of time. So we live in a time structure that's not real, it's a mechanical time structure. The real time structure is 13 full moons in a year and 13 months in a year. That all went out the window with the Romans and became the Gregorian calendar. Actually, that might be Pope Gregory, I think. But basically, by changing the calendar, again, they cut people away from time having some sort of natural order to suddenly giving it strange months that all have different lengths of days, 28, 30, 31. There's 28 days in a month because that's the cycle of the full moon. So basically we went away from time being controlled by the moon, 13 full moons in a year, 28 days in a month, 13 months in a year, to base 12, where we have 30, 31, and all different, and none of it makes sense. It's not tied to anything natural, which is why your Christian holidays, the dates move forward and backward in the calendar. When we worked on a lunar calendar many thousands of years ago, all your religious festivals would have been on the same day every year, like they are in India, because it's lunar. So, this thing with the calendar started a long time ago then, where they took the long-term sense of time away from natural order. Then when the mass mechanization of time happened in the Middle Ages, then that came to the micromanaging of people's personal time. And you could measure and monitor and control people's labour through the clock, how much you paid them. So, and that further removed time then down to micro time, seconds and minutes, and to a clock and a ticking round, which is even further removed from the natural order of things. And nowadays we're into split second and nanosecond and everything's faster and faster and faster, but everybody's got less time. And they've got less time because they've focused on time and everything is about time. So we have a time famine. When you live in a state of mind where you're not interested in time and time doesn't really matter, then you've got lots of time. Can you see the paradox there? So part of the conditioning then as a Western person, and what makes us insane in some ways from an Indian perspective, when you see Westerners like, when's this train coming? Well, the Indians are like, oh, just relax, man, you know, the train will get you when it gets you. But I have to be on time. You know, you see German and American people getting particularly stressed about enjoying their free time. You know, they've got to achieve things in their free time, and I've got 2 weeks to be enlightened in Rishikesh. It's hilarious. So that's one of the first head fucks, if you like, there's no other nice way to say this, of the human race, was the head fuck about the control of time. See, before that, we were considerably freer than we are now. And if you look back at the human race and what our leaders and what the intellectual mind has done over millennia is take us further and further and further away from nature and natural things. And you never stop to consider that your perception of time has been doctored with as well. Same as your perception of medicine. There was a time when all medicine came from plants. These days, basically, the pharmaceutical companies cannot patent something if it came from a plant, so they can't make money out of it. So they just throw all the useful plant stuff in the garbage pile of human knowledge because they don't make money out of it. And what you're given then is a load of chemical shite that causes more problems than what the herbal stuff would have done. And what they've done then, you see, is deprived you of natural ways of making yourself well. And this whole dance, you know, they talk about the Garden of Eden and this snake appears, and, you know, Christians blame women, but if you look at it really, you've got man and woman, so if you look at that esoterically, what you've got then is you've got consciousness and energy, or consciousness and materialism. And so the female is associated with energy and materialism because it's the female that builds babies. I think I don't care about what the crap they say today. Women make babies, get lost. Anyway, so materialism. If you look at the Bible then, the serpent appealed to the material aspect of man. And then man's material nature persuaded his spiritual nature that you should listen to this snake. I think it was Ricky Gervais did say that God was a bit mean, and he could have said to Adam and Eve, by the way, I put a talking snake in the Garden of Eden, please don't listen to anything it says, it's a liar. But God never said that. It's a shame, really. But if we look at the story of the Garden of Eden, it didn't happen thousands of years ago and then it was over. It's a continual process of removal from our natural world and our natural state, which is a feeling of joyfulness and being eternal and feeling in communion with the living world and being part of the earth, you see, and they've destroyed that within our society and taken us into a false man-made intellectual paradigm which is against nature. And it gets worse, you see. So now, not only have they taken you away from your food, you see, you buy your food in a supermarket out of a tin can, there's no relationship with your food, there's no relationship with time and therefore with yourself. There's no real relationship with the living world because we're isolated and afraid from it and living in heated homes, and we live by mechanical time instead of being out in the world and being part of nature. So we've removed ourselves from nature. And the further and further and further we remove ourselves from nature, the more insane the human race collectively becomes, as now people are afraid of a cold virus, for God's sake. So there's been this collective dishevelment of humanity, and people think that we're rising to ascension. I'd say that we've been devolving ever since we stopped living as hunter-gatherers. So I've lived with hunter-gatherers and been around them. I've met them in Australia, proper Aboriginal people who live by the old ways. And when I've been in India and Thailand, I've met Aboriginal people who live out in the jungles, and they've got something that we lost a long time ago. And it's this sense of ease, and it's a sense of belonging in the world, and of being part of it all, and of being in holy communion with God's creation. They're not worshipping God's creation because that's materialism again. You see, we don't worship the things that God makes. We worship the thing that made the things, so to speak. So rather than, what I found with them, rather than worshipping the planet Earth, which is what a lot of these liberal environmentalists are doing today, by the way, with all this Gaia nonsense, you're starting to worship the material world. But really, you should be worshipping the Holy Spirit that created the material world. This is what all religions did, by the way. They lifted mankind out of debauchery and human sacrifice and praying to volcanoes and trees and spirits, and people started worshipping the force that was behind the manifestation. This is the good thing that religion did, and I'm bashing religion quite a lot, but it did kind of lift mankind out of a dark place of worshipping materialism. Unfortunately, we're now going back into that dark place where we are beginning to worship materialism again. And the way it's going to get worse is that now they've got this, I don't know, what's this Zuckerberg person with his new paradigm and platform that plans to entrap all humanity. And basically what they're going to do then is take you away from the physical world and bring you into an artificial reality that they control. And I'm sure it's going to work out really well for them and not so well for the masses, which if you look at all the stages of development that we've gone through, the mechanisation of time, mechanisation of labour. It hasn't worked out too well for ordinary people who've had to live through all of this. And so basically what they want to do now is, with this Internet of Things, is take you out of ordinary reality. And then when they take you out of ordinary reality, they've got absolute control over every living soul, which is the first thing the snake wanted back at the beginning in the Bible when it went to trick man. It was after control over every living soul. And that old snake is about to do mankind. Looks like it got us in the end, the old snake. Unless